PR compass, set magnetic. Trim, set for takeoff. Propellers, all fine. Fuel, numbers 1 and 2 tanks selected, booster pumps on. Flaps, set for takeoff.
Suddenly a touch on my wife's shoulder. Good gracious, fancy seeing you. It was our immediate neighbours from Hillcrest Road, Orpington, that moved down to a neighbouring village. You can't get away with it.
You must remember this. A kiss is still a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you. On that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by. Moonlight and love songs never out of date. Hearts full of passion, jealousy and hate. Woman needs man and man must have his mate. That no one can deny. It's still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. The world will always welcome lovers as time goes by.
Hendon, July 1989. Old enemies meet and find they have a lot in common.
But to come together now, and just you and myself, and yet there must be many hundreds from your nationality, from your nation, and my nation that have met on holiday and for other reasons and business. And what has come out of the past, I hope we've got a lot of good to look forward to in the future.
Yes, we have, so it's my meaning.
45 years ago, they were trying to kill each other in the skies over Germany. They were fighting a new kind of war in which populations were killed by bombing. That would have been regarded as barbaric in 1939, but in 1939 many of them were still schoolboys. What made them volunteer to take part in the air war?
I was 15 when the war broke out. Let me see, Yad 44. But then just 15 when the war broke out. And moved up to Dewsbury. Wanted to go into the RAF, wanted to be a fighter pilot, as everybody did, all the glamour and the brill cream, one remembers very well. And from then on, my whole being was directed towards being in the Air Force, to flying, and to doing my bit, as we used to say in those days.
John Challoner was at grammar school in Burnley.
I didn't think it was an attainable situation to become a pilot in the Royal Air Force. This was reserved for the superior beings. But so when Nellie Owens came back, resplendent in his sergeant's uniform and the wings of a pilot officer, this was an amazing situation. And if Nellie Owens could do it, I thought I could do it. So this was it. And Nellie inspired me. Otherwise, I might have finished up as a stoker in the Royal Navy.
Bill Williams was a bit older. He'd been a clerk, then a policeman.
They bunged me into the service police, actually. I was doing that from June 1940 until May 42. But I was a corporal then, but it didn't seem right because service police aren't exactly the flavour of the month. And I wanted to join aircrew because the family tried to talk me out of it. But seemed to be more adventure on aircrew, kicks and what have you, and quite a bit of glamour to be aircrew. It seemed to be the thing to do.
So when you volunteered, it was with dreams of becoming a Spitfire pilot?
Yes, that's right. We all wanted to be Spitfire pilots, but in those days you couldn't specify what branch of aircrew you wanted to be, and you joined under what was called the PNB scheme. That was pilot, navigator, or bomber. And they selected you on such aptitude as you displayed, and I suppose on their requirements at the time. And I turned out to be a navigator, and they put me on bombers. So there were the dreams of being a Spitfire pilot well and truly gone. Just as well, perhaps, I probably wouldn't have survived.
Line shoot. These fighter types, you know. Top button undone. Victory rolls. Bad show, I think. That's two of them. Can you see the third? No, sir. Mind you, I'm not saying they're not doing a good job at the moment.
You were part of an elite when you were in the Air Force.
We thought we were elite. We'd been conditioned, young people like me being conditioned by the films, you see. The films about Bomber Command, about the Air Force. And what we were trying to do, I imagine, was behave as we thought they should behave. So this brought in all the slang, the jargon, the bang on and the wacko and the expressions. You never got killed. You went for a Burton, you got the chop, and so on and so on. And you're just playing a part. We were children, young people, plucked out of Civil Street, suddenly found ourselves in our own minds very, very important. 3 stripes, later 3 stripes and a crown, and later still a little bar, and a flying badge here. And the glamour, you see, was still there. We went out to a pub. We thought people are looking at you. They know your aircrew, your bomber command, you see. And we played the part.
Well, Penrose, what got you into the flying racket?
3 pints of beer, I think. I don't know, really. I had to do something about it, and I felt I'd sooner do it this way than any other.
What did you do before that?
I was a schoolmaster at a secondary school. Afraid I'm just an amateur.
There aren't any amateurs and professionals anymore. Just good pilots and bad pilots. The good pilots stay alive and the bad ones don't. And that's not true anymore either.
Hayo Hammond stayed alive. He flew 350 bombing missions. Then he became a night fighter pilot.
There was a very stubborn gunman in one Lancaster. He had shot the Lancaster and it burned. And I followed it a little bit. I didn't know whether it was successful enough from my side. But this one, and the first of the crew bailed out. And alongside my plane, I was very frightened by this. I hadn't seen that before. But since then, the gunman shot at me out of the burning plane. And
could he see you?
Yes, of course. I was at 30 meters. Like I saw every dirty thing on the glass of his turret behind, and I saw him under his machine gun. Still, I thought it was all right, and he would never think to shoot at me, but he did, and he hit me. So my engine was out, and so I had to bail out and fell into a lake.
Hayo Hammond joined the Luftwaffe in 1935. He became an ace bomber pilot. He bombed everywhere from the Mediterranean to the Arctic Circle. He was a friend of the Goerings, and in 1943 he was made responsible for the defence of Berlin. That must have been when he first encountered John Challoner.
May I ask you, what is your age?
Good question. I'm 68.
68?
Yes.
Oh, you are a very young
man.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I know, yes.
You must speak Colonel to me, of course.
Of course.
75.
76 next month.
Incredible, man. Yes. And you're still flying?
Yes.
Hayo Herman fought the war from the beginning to what he calls the bitter end. After the war, he was kept in Soviet prison camps for 10 years. In 1939, he took part in the invasion of Poland. Now a Dusseldorf lawyer, he remains completely unrepentant.
I had many talks with my friends in England, with my bomber friends and other friends. Nobody could really see a ground, a reason why we should have attacked Poland. I only said, how long would you see and tolerate a state where one would have separated England, say, by a corridor from Hull on the Humber to Liverpool, 30, 40 kilometers broad. How long would you tolerate it? You had lost a war, there was a peace, and now there is a corridor. Now, I think you wouldn't tolerate it for 2 or 3 years and then take it back.
Was sagen Sie nun, Herr Chamberlain? Hier können Sie sich von der Katastrophe überzeugen, in die Sie die polnische Hauptstadt gestürzt haben. Fürchten Sie nicht den Fluch eines verratenen Volkes? Hier haben Sie das Ergebnis Ihrer gewissenlosen Kriegspolitik. Alles dies ist Ihr Werk. Eine Schuld, die Sie einmal vor dem Weltgericht zu verantworten haben. Und merken Sie sich eins. So ist es, wenn die deutsche Luftwaffe zuschlägt. Sie wird auch den Schuldigsten der Schuldigen zu treffen wissen.
We shall have more guns, more tanks, more planes.
Planes? With engines, I suppose?
Oh yes, with engines. Goering will see to that. Doesn't matter if he asks for 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. He will get them.
In 1939, both sides thought that the Luftwaffe could wipe out cities at will. In fact, the Luftwaffe had only been trained to support the army. In spite of their propaganda, they had no plans for wiping out British cities, and they never had 1,000 heavy bombers. Both sides thought that bombers could hit what they aimed at. They couldn't, and when they missed, they hit schools and hospitals and churches. Each side accused the other of indiscriminate bombing.
I must say, and this I would repeat, that the British began the bombing. And your Under-Secretary of State, Spade, has written it in his book, Bombing Vindicated, that was we who began the bombing against the German towns. When the British began to bomb indiscriminately after 10th or 11th of May 1940, then we refrained from bombing England. We were even not allowed to fly over British territory. Later on, we bombed in the Battle of Britain the airfields for preparation of the invasion, you see, which did not take place. And in this time, several raids were ordered by the Royal Air Force against Berlin. And so we were ordered to bomb London.
Well, of course, that's very interesting, but it's just your point of view.
One day it will be yours, Mr. Crisp. Because here now, we are making history.
Well, history's only important while it's being made. Well, I'm all for history remaining the way it is.
Here they come.
While the Germans were dropping bombs on British cities, the British claimed to be hitting military targets. But in 1941, they discovered that only one bomber in 4 was getting within 5 miles of the target.
Now the searchlights are poking long, white, inquisitive fingers into the blackness of the night. These are not Hollywood sound effects.
This is the music they play every night in London, the Symphony of War.
In 1942, the British changed their policy to area bombing.
That was a bomb.
Don't let's be beastly to the Germans when we've definitely got them on the run. Let us treat them very kindly, as we would a valued friend. We might send them out some bishops as a form of lease and
Ref
lend.
the new bombing directive. I suppose it is clear that the aiming points are to be the built-up areas, not, for instance, the dockyards or aircraft factories where these are mentioned. This must be made quite clear if it is not already understood. Sir Charles Portal, Chief of the Air Staff, 15th of February, 1942.
Let's be sweet to them and day by day repeat to them that sterilization simply isn't done. Let's help the dirty swine again to occupy the Rhine again, but don't let's be beastly to the Hun.
The psychological effects of bombing have little connection with the military or economic importance of the target. They are determined solely by the amount of destruction caused. I wish to recommend, therefore, that in the selection of targets in Germany, the claims of smaller towns of under 150,000 inhabitants, which are not too heavily defended, should be considered, even though those towns contain only targets of secondary importance. Mr. Anthony Eden, Foreign Secretary, 15th of April, 1942.
Don't let's be beastly to the Germans when the age of peace and plenty has begun. We must send them steel and oil and coal and everything they need, for their peaceable intentions can be always guaranteed. Let's employ with them a sort of strength through joy with them. They're better than us at honest manly fun.
On the night of the 28th, 29th of March 1942, the first German city went up in flames. This was Lübeck, by no means so well defended as the Ruhr, and from the nature of its buildings, easier than most cities to set on fire. It was not a vital target, but it seemed better to me to destroy an industrial town of moderate importance than to fail to destroy a large industrial city. However, the main object of the attack was to learn to what extent a first wave of aircraft could guide a second wave to the aiming point by starting a conflagration. Air Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, Commander-in-Chief, Bomber Command, 1942 to 1945.
Let's let them feel their swell again and bomb us all to hell again, but don't let's be beastly to the Hun.
I walk alone because to tell you the truth I'll be lonely. I don't mind being lonely.
It seems to me, although I'm aware that memories play tricks, that this was the direction we mostly used to taxi out for takeoff. And I have the clear memory of taxiing along here with maybe 12 Halifaxes, more or less nose to tail, swinging round onto the end of the main runway. Or sometimes, of course, we'd come out from that direction. And then your pilot would have got RT clearance to take off. Then you'd get a green light from the caravan, which would be the end of and then off you'd go.
By the time Peter Hinchcliffe became a Bomber Command navigator, area bombing by night had become, as he puts it, the order of the day.
Navigator to skipper. Alter course 137 compass. Estimate 31 minutes to target. Look out for the TIs.
It's hard to remember the long drawn-out period you were airborne. I remember the cold. I remember handling instruments. There was a thing we called a computer. Sometimes your fingers would almost stick to that with the cold. It'd feel tacky. The turbulence is another thing, the bumping. There was nothing smooth about flying in those days. I flew most of my operations during winter, and we were nearly always in cloud. No matter how smooth cloud looks, it's bumpy inside. The noise, apart from the engine noise, there's the thumping noise as the aeroplane's going up and down. what most clearly stays in my mind, I think, the smell of an aeroplane. There's a very, very distinctive smell. Fuel and, I suppose, dope. And before we took off, we used to have a so-called flying meal. This was a special meal. It was rather like prisoner's last breakfast, that, you're getting a special treat because you never know whether you're going to get another one. And we had things that were in terribly short supply, bacon and eggs and so on. But for some reason or other on my squadron, they always used to give us a big pile of Heinz baked beans. Now, without being too indelicate, I want you to imagine the effect of feeding 7 healthy young males on Heinz baked beans, then taking them up to 20,000 feet in an unpressurized aeroplane. And you're beginning to get, particularly following this line of thought, the toilet on the aeroplane, the Elson toilet, that was another contributory smell because it used to slosh around. It was a tin bucket thing down at the back of the fuselage with the lid on. But that was another contributory smell.
The atmosphere changed, depending on whether there were ops on or not. If there were no ops on, then the place was full. It was a hive of activity. As well as the fact that the pubs were full, the dance halls were full, because people were relaxed, people were off duty, people were letting their hair down. Everybody was. But then, when ops were on, it was quite different, because everybody was working flat out to get the aircraft out. And of course, there was no such thing as, it's 5 o'clock, I'm knocking off, Jack. You worked till the aircraft took off. And once they took off, there would be a lull. And there's a strange sort of quietness would arrive, because from all the activity and the noise of the engines and the bombing up and everything was going, suddenly the aircraft had gone and there was nothing to do but wait for them to come back.
One night, Irene Hinchliffe sat on a fence waiting for the bombers to come back.
I thought, well, I'd missed perhaps while I was putting my bicycle away, or they'd landed before I'd come down the road or what have you. And although I had no premonitions or anything like that, I was miserable. And I think possibly it was because I was miserable that I was sitting on the fence anyway. And I went to bed and went to sleep. And I was awoken next morning by a corporal who had been on night duty. She was a very nice girl, very sweet girl. And she told me that she'd got some bad news, said, I've got some bad news for you, Irene. I'm afraid Peter's aircraft didn't come back last night.
Completely out of the blue, banging and popping and flashing. And we assumed that we'd been hit by schräge Musik from below because we saw nothing at all. No
from
warning.
Beneath, from below, yes.
That is right. Schräge Musik were upward-firing cannon on mostly Junkers 88. From the night fighter, that's right. Mm-hmm. Well, our left-hand wing caught fire immediately, and the skipper, the pilot, said, all that I remember him was say, for Christ's sake, bail out. I deployed the parachute and almost immediately hit, well, it wasn't the ground because I hit telegraph wires first of all, then hit the ground. But even before I'd hit the ground, I saw the aeroplane hit and explode. Yeah. And this was just south of Liège in Belgium, a place called Marche-en-Famenne. And my wireless operator landed about 100 yards, 200 yards away from me. He was second out. And the aeroplane another couple of 100 yards away, and the other 5 members of the crew were killed. And that was really my experience, that's all.
We were very young, we were all very young. And what I'm looking at today are a lot of old men who, when they were young men, were on opposite sides of the fence. They were trying to kill each other. They were bombing each other's country. They were fighting each other. They each thought that they were right. And yet now they also, I think, shared a unique experience, because I don't think you could fight that kind of war again. Not today. So that in itself was unique. And now that they're old men, they're meeting each other, they're getting together, they're talking to each other. And they like each other, see? They share each other's experiences. And I can't help feeling that there should be a better way for countries to settle their differences than by their old men sending their young men out to die for each other, to kill each other.
Please walk alone and send your love and your kisses to guide me.
Harris had been ordered to bomb built-up areas, but nobody knew how to destroy built-up areas in 1942. He had to invent new methods. He tried to get as many bombers as possible over a target in as short a time as possible. The bombers all tried to hit the same aiming point. Harris relied on the fact that they would miss to spread the destruction over the selected area. The first bombers to arrive over the target started fires. The rest of the bombers aimed at those fires.
The thing was the extent, the area extent of the devastation. Take Butl and multiply it 100 times and say this is Hamburg or this is Düsseldorf. And that is what you get, complete devastation. And if you're talking, if you want a statistical comparison, if you talked about Liverpool during all the so-called Blitz, during the whole war, in Liverpool, I think the figure was about 3,500 killed. Take one night on Hamburg in July 43, when I think there were up to 50,000 killed, 40+ thousand, and multiply this by 100 times the cities bombed. You know, there can be no comparison whatsoever. The damage in London was negligible compared with that in Germany during the war.
When Bomber Command attacked Hamburg in July 1943, the German defences were overwhelmed. Hayo Hermann led 25 of these single-engine fighters against 748 four-engine bombers.
First, to take the belts for the shoulder behind.
His tactics were described as wild sow, crazy. But a wild sow, he says, defends its young to the death.
I see already all is on its real place here. The altimeter is all right, the speed, even the watch. And so, yes, thank you indeed. All is familiar still to me.
In the months that followed, Hermann reorganised the night fighter defences. He brought fighters from all over Western Europe to attack the bombers over the target cities. The single-engine fighters weren't supposed to fly in the dark. They had no radar. Hermann lit up the skies so that they could see the bombers.
The Germans dropped these fighter flares, and in the case of Berlin, they used to stretch virtually from the Dutch coast all the way to Berlin. And apart from the fact that it gave you a little bit of a feeling of apprehension,
when you're flying along what was the Autobahn with all the lights flashing, and you were supposed to follow this line. And of course, the fighter flares were on this side, and the German fighters were on that side because they'd have you silhouetted against the flares.
Look here. In a normal night, we could see the English bombers from below up to the high, around about 400 meters against the sky. And if we had a night with some moonlight, then we could see them sometimes from 800 to 1,000 meters.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. We always felt very vulnerable when it was a light night, particularly if there was a light night moon and cloud beneath us. That was terribly worrying.
It was deadly for you.
Yes, yes.
Really.
Yes. But how did we look? From you were perhaps above us, we were coming along over the cloud, maybe a light night. What did we look like? Wie sahen wir da aus, ja?
I will tell you. You look, it was a picture like the flies on the ceiling of the kitchen.
Wir waren in dieser Nacht mit den 8 Abschüssen insgesamt, waren wir mitten im Bombersturm drin. Also überall Lancaster, Lancaster, Lancaster. Die schoss nach vorne, nach schräg oben und überall. Und war eben nach 7 Abschüssen verschossen. Ich hatte keine Munition mehr.
2/3 of my job was finding the right wind so you could adjust your course to maintain the track that you've been briefed to do, because you couldn't afford to stray too far off track, because the bomber stream normally, the main force, was about a mile across, and if you strayed too far off you were liable to get the chop. Or if you got to the target, well, you couldn't get to the target too early. I mean, you had a time on target, ETA, estimated time of arrival, and you had to bomb then. That was the whole plan of Bomber Command, to bomb at a certain time.
The navigator's position had a black curtain over here to keep out the light, a little bit of light from the angle poise. But as I said before, when you came up to the target, I used to come up to this position here and look through and check on for other aircraft, friendly and unfriendly, because you could get as much trouble from friendly aircraft, particularly if you were below them, over the target, because they had a nasty habit of dropping bombs on other friendly airplanes.
Was that the blip you talked about?
That's right, yes. Yeah, well, it gave you a good field of view here, and as you can see through here to the rear of the aircraft, and they are vertically down, the aircraft.
8 miles to the aiming point. Track looks good. The target is now clearly visible. Huge fires have broken out.
Well, the target was unbelievable. It's beyond my description. There was usually cloud below. Below the cloud you went to fires, and as the cookies exploded, and cookies were the large 4,000-pounder bombs, there was it looked like a bubbling in a huge cauldron, and of course you had the anti-aircraft explosions and the cordite flying past like miniature clouds as you were going through to the target. There were aircraft being shot down left, right and centre.
Were you afraid?
I suppose, yes, I suppose I was afraid, and you were very excited. Very excited when you were in the target and when other aircraft were being shot down in close proximity, because you felt that it's quite likely that you might be the next victim. But we got some consolation in the fact that we did survive.
Neither Hermann nor Challoner should have survived. More than 90% of the German night fighter pilots were killed. And when Challoner flew to Berlin, you were lucky if you survived 3 trips.
That's it, yeah.
Challoner came back from 12.
12.
He was shot down twice over Berlin, 3 times? Twice over Berlin.
Yeah, thrice.
Yeah. He landed in a lake.
The difficulty if you'd landed in the fires there in the...
Yeah, yes.
Over the city.
Yes.
If you were in the... And particularly if you're in the middle of the air raid also.
Yes.
Yes, that must have been a difficult situation.
I saw some of your fellows falling into Berlin.
So, yes. Burning buildings, yes. It was a dreadful situation there, yes.
Air warfare, terrifying and devastating, has returned 100-fold to Germany. RAF Lancasters unload everything from 500-pounders to blockbusters on Pforzheim, important industrial center. A city is literally being wiped out before your eyes. Explosions and fires are sucking the oxygen from the air. Nothing can live in this inferno. City by city, the Nazi Reich is dying.
Pforzheim lies in the heart of Baden-Württemberg. We have 106,000 inhabitants at the moment. And there were 2 very important developments in the town. First, the starting of the jewelry and watch production. This took place in 1767, 222 years ago, by the then Margrave of Baden. And the second important section was started after the 23rd of February 1945, when the whole of the town was destroyed.
Über 80% der Bausubstanz der Stadt wurde zerstört und innerhalb von knapp 20 Minuten fanden 17.600 Menschen den Tod.
More than 80% of the whole area was destroyed, and within 20 minutes, 17,600 people were killed.
It doesn't stick out of my mind, Pforzheim. It was just one more raid and one less, you know.
You don't remember the briefing at all?
No, well, the only thing I recall at the briefing was that they manufactured precision instruments there. What, they didn't tell us, but I assume perhaps ball bearings but I remember it was just precision instruments. But nothing registered really, was, as I say, one more, one less.
Aber ich war so direkt betroffen und es war für mich als Kind so ein schrecklicher Eindruck, dass ich das noch heute vor mir sehe, als sei es gerade geschehen.
We were airborne at 18.5. Then I leapt into action, reset the altimeter, and set course from base.
Es war ein schöner Tag, dieser 23. Februar, sonniges Wetter und wir spielten auf der Straße mit anderen Kindern zusammen. Wir haben dabei die Flugzeuge, die Beobachter oben am Himmel gesehen, aber wir haben keine Angst gehabt. Wir wussten, diese Flugzeuge werfen keine Bomben ab.
Estimated time of arrival was 20.04, which is 8 o'clock, obviously. And we got there. Let's try and surprise myself. What time did we get there? .048. Goodness gracious me. That's why I'm still living, isn't it? I must have been good, mustn't I?
Abends hat mich meine Mutter zu Bett gebracht, wie üblich. Und dann, so kurz vor 20 Uhr, wurde ich herausgerissen aus dem Schlaf, angezogen und schnell in den Keller gebracht. Und kurz darauf hörten wir auch schon die ersten Einschläge der Bomben und spürten direkt, wie das immer näher zu uns herkam.
Bomb doors open at 20.03.6. Bomb doors open, and bombs went down just 0.3 after that.
Fort Syme was destroyed in 20 minutes on the 23rd of February 1945. It was only one of more than 40 cities destroyed in the last 6 months of the war. Many of the cities experienced firestorms, like this one at Hamburg. In a firestorm, a lot of small fires come together to form a huge whirlwind of flame. People and objects are sucked into the blaze. The first man-made firestorm happened in Hamburg in July 1943, when more than 40,000 people were killed.
My contention, Peter, and we're going to differ on this, is that the firestorm technique was a calculated technique.
No, it was not.
Right, and that's where we differ.
Absolutely. You don't set out to create a firestorm. If a firestorm happens, then tant pis or tant mieux, whichever way you care to look at it. But you do not say we will create a firestorm. Certainly you set off to set fire to towns if the fire, it has to be like Lübeck, a particularly inflammable town.
That's right, yes.
But the firestorm as such is not calculated. As I'm saying, nothing was done to avoid the firestorm, but the firestorm was a meteorological and physical phenomenon.
Yeah. The idea of Dresden was not to destroy the town, but was to dislocate the communications.
Well, this is ostensibly. This is not. This is the.
No.
This is but they didn't bomb the market. They only partly bombed the market. They destroyed the town and killed about 100,000 people.
Negative, you're doubling it.
Yes,
well, according
nothing
to
like that.
Again, to the point, at High Wycombe, Bomber Command headquarters, there were boffins working specifically on the firestorm technique.
But the
object... Yes, they were propounding it.
But the object...
And Harris grasped this idea with open hands.
Of course he would, if it had happened, but it didn't happen like that. Dresden was not set fire to intentionally. I mean, nobody set off to say, we will burn Dresden down, any more than... I did Chemnitz the day after Dresden.
Yes.
And as far as I know, the OP was exactly the same. It was just the way we were operating in those days. And if a firestorm occurs, then that is one of the fortunes or misfortunes of war.
My house is on this one here, number 8. And this was my daily walk for 10 years across that very old market square, Altmarkt.
Dresden was bombed 3 times on the 13th to the 14th of February 1945. It was Shrove Tuesday. A first wave of bombers set fire to the city, and a second wave bombed the blaze. The Americans bombed it again the morning after.
Well, the first time it was quite... One detonation after another came and took about, I think, half an hour. We were terribly frightened. And left and right it seemed as like it hitting us, but then we heard the all clear. With relief we went upstairs again. Everything was, of course, broken, windows and so on, but our house still stood. It was my duty to go up in the attic to find out if not some of the houses would, with the flames, the wind was so fierce, start to burn our house. And I think it must have been the most frightened time I ever had in my life, because I was seeing all on the top roofs burning everywhere. My goodness, where we came out then, the whole street, it was in flames. It was like a snowstorm where everything was fire instead of snow. So as soon as you went out on the street, your hair started getting full with flames and burning, and we were not prepared because we didn't know. We had no bunkers in Dresden, very few. And everything, if you would have had wet blankets or something, it would have stopped many people from burning straight away. All your clothes and the shoes, everything, it was phosphor running on the street. Our luck was we had only about 100 yards to the river embankment, to the river Elbe, but people behind us in the city, there was no chance. It was impossible to escape from what happened, what we saw there. I had only this feeling to get away, and people streamed in thousands. So we were, by that time, that was midday, walking already a long, long way from Dresden. And all of a sudden, we heard again, in a long distance, sirens. We couldn't make that out, what it meant. And in a very brief time, we saw planes coming down and they were shooting. And again, another third rate. But they came down, diving at us with machine guns. And anybody moving, everybody was shot. It was like execution. It was a field where we tried to keep as still as possible, because in the moment they seemed to have a real joy going down to anybody. It was, by that time we could hardly think it was possible that things happen like that. And that was a third rate. But I believe that these were the Americans which came in the day rate. After the bombing, we could not bury the dead. All the cemeteries were full up. So they decided to put iron girders on the marketplace, which was a scene you would have thought it's in the Middle Ages, but not in 1945. And cartload after cartload was put there on incinerators, and it burned night and day.
January and February were never so empty and grey. Tragically I feel like crying. Without you, my darling, I'm dying. But let's rather put it this way. Spring will be a little late this year, a little late arriving in my lonely world over here. For you have left me, and where is our April?
Die gesamten Trümmer der Stadt mussten ja beseitigt werden. Und den größten Teil schüttete man hier auf diesen flachen Hügel auf zu einem hohen Berg.
And there was a little hill, a little flat hill, where the Walberg is now, and they made a rather steep hill out of it for the ruins.
Diesen Trümmerberg nennen die Pforzheimer Monte Scherbellino.
Well, the people of Pforzheim call this little mountain Monte Scherbellino.
Ich weiß, dass hier sehr, sehr viele Tausende von Tote begraben sind.
I know that thousands of dead bodies are buried there.
Für uns ist dieser Wallberg eine große Grabstätte, ein großes Grab.
For us, it's a very big tomb, a cemetery for people.
It was not part of their blood. It came to them very late, with long arrears to make good, when the English began to hate. It was not suddenly bred. It will not swiftly abate through the chill years ahead, when time shall count from the date when the English began to hate.
I never knew hate during the whole time during the war because I never felt in any way like this. But where I laid on that grass after I survived 2 raids and they came down and shot at us, I could have, with my bare hands, done something to them. That was the first time I really felt a hate. How could anybody do that after we were helpless there standing nothing? A soldier has a gun in his hand, but we were women and children. How can you do that to people? To me, I can understand Jewish people, how they felt, and still feel today, because I felt exactly the same.
I don't regret anything except Dresden. And I do regret that. Women and children. I mean, I had no thoughts of right or wrong. It was just them and us, you know. I mean, when I first joined aircrew, I didn't do it for any moral reason. Just that I wanted to fly and a bit of glamour, wanted some excitement, and it seemed the place to be if you're in the Air Force. But I had no anti-German feelings at all. That came afterwards when Belsen business came out, but at the time, nothing personal about it.
You never had any regrets about anything that you did?
I think we were too concerned with our own predicament, really, that we didn't. I don't think we were very political or well, I'm sure we weren't political about the thing. It seemed to be obvious to us that either we won the war or they won the war, and of the two, it was preferable that we won the war. And to do that, you had to do your duty.
Because just as Colonel Herman was doing what he thought was right for his country, so I, and in a very, very minor way, but thousands and thousands of people like me, did what they thought was right for their country. And this is the nature of war. And the more that we try to go back and to isolate, to take out specific incidents and say that this proves anything, it doesn't. All that it proves is that fundamentally man is, a man who is pushed into a corner is a vicious, vicious creature and will do everything to fight his way out. And fundamentally, that is my approach to the way I see this matter.
Yes, and I think that means if you have a weapon that is deadly without discrimination between the people beneath, then you have to consider whether to employ this weapon or to abstain. And I believe that is, considering human nature, impossible to refrain from using it when you are in the corner.
Absolutely.
But what my objection is, were you in that corner in 1945?
In 1945, the Luftwaffe was so short of fuel that fighter planes were being dragged to the runways by oxen. Hayo Herman could only watch helplessly as both the British and the Americans bombed city after city. He felt bitter that the wild sow could no longer defend its young. And he believes today that the history written by the victors has done the German soldier an injustice.
It is well known that the televisions and the newspaper do not really inform the public about what happened. All what is written about the war from the German side is completely distorted. The German soldier is an ugly German. He is cruel, he is idiotic, he is senseless and without any culture. Yeah, we have to take this as a fact, but to see that our sons are influenced in this way, there comes a gap between the old generation and the new. And this, of course, is a very painful situation within families and within the whole country.
They were a determined people, as the British are determined people. They're very much the same as we are. And certainly that the only effective way is actually beating them at their own game, which Brutalians were trying to do. The Germans would have done exactly the same. We had no... I personally had no dislike of the Germans, although my family suffered in the First World War. But I think most people didn't have any dislike of the Germans individually.
I don't think in retrospect it was necessary to wage the war in that way. But you see, anybody can go back, you can go to any war, any situation in human being, and say people did it wrong, they should have done it this way. At any time in history, you're subjected to subject you, I mean the country, and the individual, to so many pressures, so many concepts, so much, if you like, propaganda. And all that one can say, just as one would say about the First World War and what went on in Flanders and so on, it seemed right at the time. And you cannot go back and try and remodel history. And people who say that Bomber Command were wrong, Bomber Command were murderers, I've hinted, these people should sit back and ask themselves, what would they themselves do if they were in this situation at this time, when it seemed that the only way in which we were going to win the war was to kill as many Germans as we possibly could. I can't defend that on moral grounds, but I can make that statement. That is how it seemed right at the time, and it would seem right again if a similar thing happened today.
Again, you can't reconstruct it, and as I'm talking now, there's so many memories coming back, particularly the memories of my first crew, and as I'm talking, I can almost feel the tears coming into my eyes, because, as you know, they were all killed except myself and the wireless operator. And Johnny is in a mental hospital to this day, possibly as a result of that experience.
We flew some ground crew over the Ruhr afterwards. It was a horrifying sight. The whole Ruhr Valley was dead, just a pall of grey smoke over it. Nothing going on down below at all. And we realised then we'd done rather a good job. That's what we were trained for.
Still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. The world will always welcome lovers as time goes songs never out of date, hearts full of